This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about a system that quietly changes who holds power while everyone is watching the wrong moment. A system that rewards pressure, but only if you apply it patiently. A system that punishes urgency. What looks like justice can function like leverage. What looks like isolation can create dependence, and what looks like a win can quietly redraw the map underneath it. If you're waiting for a dramatic collapse, you'll miss it. Because the most dangerous shifts don't announce themselves. They normalize, they settle in, they make themselves necessary. If you care about how power actually moves, not how it's described, stay with me. This story only works if you see the whole mechanism, not the headline. Because what just happened didn't end a problem. It unlocked something much larger. And to understand why, we have to stop looking at individuals and start looking at gravity. What actually controls this system now is not ideology. It's not elections. It's not even military power. It's access. Access to cash when no one else will lend. Access to markets when sanctions close every door. Access to time. For years, the dominant assumption was simple. Isolate a government long enough, and it will either change or collapse. That assumption treats pressure as a lever. Pull hard enough, and something moves. But pressure doesn't work in a vacuum. Pressure creates heat, and heat forces motion toward whatever structure can absorb it. When traditional lenders leave, when banks close accounts, when oil becomes toxic, control doesn't disappear. It relocates, not to speeches, not to resolutions, but to whoever can say yes when everyone else says no. That is the center of gravity now. Not who condemns, not who arrests, but who remains indispensable when isolation peaks. This isn't about loyalty, it's about dependency. And once a system reorganizes around dependency, removing a single leader doesn't loosen it, it tightens it. Because the structure underneath has already shifted. And that shift didn't happen suddenly. It happened slowly, quietly, over years, which is where this story actually begins. There was a time when this system worked very differently. Before, pressure meant negotiation. Before, isolation was temporary. Before, there were exits. Capital moved through institutions. Oil moved through open markets. Governments that mismanaged could be punished, but they could also return. Now compare that to what slowly replaced it. Loans stopped coming from banks. They started coming from states. Infrastructure stopped being neutral. It became collateral. This didn't feel dangerous at first. It felt practical. A port here, a rail line there, a refinery kept alive. No soldiers, no flags, no speeches, just continuity. And continuity is seductive when everything else is collapsing. Over time, the question changed. It stopped being, who do we agree with? It became, who will still answer the phone? That shift is easy to miss because nothing visibly breaks. There's no crash, no announcement. But once energy flows through one buyer, once debt flows through one creditor, once infrastructure is built by one system, choice narrows. Not suddenly, incrementally, and slow change is the most dangerous kind. Because by the time it feels restrictive, it's already normal. That's the quiet part of this story. The part almost no one argued about until the first shock hit. The shock didn't arrive as an invasion. It arrived as a correction. Oil prices collapsed, not gradually, violently. Revenue vanished. Production followed. The machinery that had been neglected for years didn't bend, it broke. And suddenly, a country sitting on extraordinary wealth couldn't convert it into cash. That's when the pressure campaign intensified. Financial doors closed, accounts froze, shipping routes became liabilities. The stated goal was simple: force change at the top. But systems don't experience pressure evenly. They transmit it downward. Hospitals lost supplies, supply chains snapped, currency stopped functioning as memory. What looked like discipline from the outside felt like suffocation on the inside. And here's the critical detail. When formal systems fail, informal ones take over. Trade doesn't stop. It reroutes. Oil doesn't disappear. It finds a buyer willing to accept risk. And while the focus stayed on punishment, on whether pressure was working, something else was happening underneath. A single channel stayed open, quietly, reliably, not loudly enough to make headlines, but steadily enough to become essential. This wasn't the collapse of a regime. It was the compression of options. And once options compress far enough, leverage changes hands. That's the moment everyone missed. Here's where the mechanism becomes visible. Not the rhetoric, not the morality, the plumbing. When money can't move freely, it moves conditionally. When credit disappears, it reappears with terms. When markets close, relationships replace them. Loans weren't just loans. They were timed. They were structured. They were repaid in output, not cash. Energy flowed out. Liquidity flowed in. Risk flowed one way. Infrastructure projects weren't aid. They were anchors, built to last longer than any administration. Hard to unwind, harder to replace. The benefit was stability. The cost was flexibility. One side absorbed volatility. The other absorbed control. And the brilliance of this structure is that it doesn't require obedience. It only requires continuity. As long as oil moves, as long as contracts hold, as long as debt remains outstanding, no speech is needed, no alignment required, just function. So when pressure increased from the outside, the internal logic didn't resist it. It adapted. The more isolated the system became, the more valuable its remaining connections were. And the more valuable they became, the harder it was to imagine operating without them. That's how dependence forms. Not through conquest, through relief. And once relief becomes routine, removing it feels impossible. Which is why the next shock mattered far more than it appeared. Then everything sped up, fast. A single arrest outside the system, beyond the border, and suddenly the structure lost its visible center. Power didn't transfer, it scattered. Institutions hesitated. Markets froze again. Command chains fractured. This is the moment most people misunderstand. Removing a leader feels decisive, but systems don't collapse from decapitation. They destabilize from uncertainty. Who signs contracts now? Who guarantees shipments? Who controls security? Every unanswered question increases risk. Every increase in risk raises the value of certainty. And certainty was already concentrated. So while attention fixed on legality, on symbolism, on celebration, the real movement happened elsewhere. Quiet phone calls, assurance, continuity plans, not about politics, about flow. Energy must move. Debt must be serviced. Infrastructure must operate. And the actor best positioned to promise that didn't need to say much. It just needed to remain calm. That contrast mattered. One side looked disruptive. The other looked stabilizing. And in moments like this, perception isn't cosmetic. It's catalytic, because systems under stress don't choose ideals. They choose survival. And survival has a preference. This is where it reaches you, not abstractly, not geopolitically, practically. Because when systems harden, the cost doesn't stay at the top. It moves outward, into prices, into supply, into time. You feel it when energy gets more expensive, but no one can explain why. When shortages appear without a headline, when instability elsewhere quietly taxes stability here. You're told this is distant, that it's about foreign leaders and faraway oil fields. But dependency doesn't stay contained. When leverage concentrates, flexibility disappears. For governments, for markets, for consumers, and the unsettling part is how invisible it feels while it's happening. No announcement, no warning, just fewer options everywhere. If you're watching closely, This is the moment you should pause the scroll, because once systems lock in, reversing them costs far more than building them did. This isn't about sympathy. It's about exposure. Because the same mechanics that trapped one country don't stop at borders. They scale. And once they scale, they stop being someone else's problem, which is why the next phase doesn't stay local. The effects don't radiate outward like a shockwave. They ripple quietly, unevenly, but persistently. Ports that matter to one country suddenly matter to many. Shipping lanes adjust. Insurance prices rise. Trade routes reroute around reliability, not distance. This is how a local dependency becomes a regional reference point. Other governments notice, not because they agree, but because they're watching what happens when isolation meets endurance. They see who stays. They see who leaves. They see who lectures and who keeps the lights on. And slowly, expectations shift, not toward allegiance, toward alignment with whoever can absorb instability without flinching. This is how influence spreads without treaties, without summits, without announcements. One relationship normalizes the next. One exception becomes precedent. And suddenly, the question isn't, should we engage? It's, can we afford not to? That's the global ripple. Not dramatic, not explosive, just cumulative. And once enough systems adapt this way, the map changes not politically, but functionally. Which brings us to the moment ahead. Not a prediction, a fork. From here, the system doesn't choose one future. It opens three. The first is adjustment, slow, deliberate recalibration. New lending structures, shared risk, alternatives that arrive before dependence hardens. This path requires patience, coordination, and time, the one resource already in short supply. The second is erosion, no dramatic breaks, just gradual narrowing, more contracts routed through fewer channels, more infrastructure that can't be disentangled, more decisions made by necessity instead of preference. Nothing collapses, but nothing is fully sovereign either. And then there's rupture. The moment when continuity fails, when a shipment doesn't arrive, when financing pauses, when leverage is tested instead of assumed. Rupture isn't planned. It's triggered by miscalculation, by panic, by speed. These paths aren't ideological. They're mechanical. And the unsettling truth is that systems don't announce which one they're on. They drift until a choice is made for them. Right now, all three are still open. That's what makes this moment rare. Because once momentum tips far enough in one direction, it stops being a debate. It becomes gravity. And gravity doesn't argue. This doesn't end with relief. It doesn't end with clarity. Because systems like this don't fail loudly, they settle, they harden, they make reversal feel reckless. What happened wasn't a conclusion. It was a signal, a demonstration that pressure can create opportunity, just not always for the side applying it. That isolation can feel principled while quietly transferring leverage elsewhere. That power now moves through pipes and contracts, not speeches. And if this feels unfinished, that's because it is. The question isn't whether this model works. You've already seen that it does. The question is how often it will be repeated before it's recognized for what it is. Because once dependency becomes the default solution to crisis, choice disappears without ever being outlawed. No one announces it. No one votes on it. It just arrives. If you want to understand where this goes next, not emotionally, but structurally, stay with this. Follow the pattern, not the personalities. Watch the infrastructure, not the headlines. Because the next case won't look identical. It never does. But if you know what to look for, you'll see it forming long before anyone calls it a crisis. And by then, stopping it won't be about will. It will be about whether there's still room to move.